Hey guys, welcome back to Coding with NJ. Today we are going to learn how can we translate client queries submitted through contact us form into an email and send it to the administrator or whoever is responsible to handle those queries. And we are going to do this translation at the back end. I have already created a video in which I am doing the same thing but at the front end without involving the back end. But this time I'm going to show you how can we do this at the back end using PHPMailer. So before we start coding, let me give you a demo. So this is our contact us form. It requires 3 fields: the client's name, client's email address so that he could be replied back, and the client's query itself. So let me fill in those details. Hit the send message and I got the message that the mail has been sent successfully. Now I'm going to check my inbox to make sure that I actually have received this email. As you can see, I have got a message and it says, "Hello, query from John Doe from John Doe." Now we need to figure out how can we actually make that possible. So let's start coding. So I have an empty project in Visual Studio. Let me create a file. So I'm going to name it index. Now the extension that I'm giving it is PHP, and the reason for giving it PHP extension and not HTML extension is that this time I'm going to put my front end and back end code in the same file. So if I have PHP code in a file with extension.html, PHP code will not execute. But if I have HTML code in a PHP file, both PHP as well as HTML code will execute properly. So that's why I have to give it PHP extension. Okay, even though we are going to put front end and back end in the same file, but I am going to start off with front end code. Okay, so this is basic HTML skeleton. So I need to change the title first. Contact us. Now in the body I basically require just 2 HTML elements, a H1 tag for the heading and the form which the client is going to fill in. So H1, and the contents of this H1 is going to be contact us form. Now let's create a form. In the action field, I am going to put same file name, that is index.php. This is because our backend is also going to be contained in the same file. And we also need to describe the method. Because we are sending data to the server, so we have to use a method post. This way all the form data is going to be carried as a payload for the HTTP request that will go to the server. Now within this form we require 4 fields. One input field of type text for the full name, second input field of type email for the email, third is going to be text area field, and the fourth one is going to be input field of type submit. So the name that I am going to give it is name as well. I don't need ID. Then input field of type email, and the name I'm going to assign email as well. Then text area, and the name that I'm giving this text area is message. Last but not least, an input field of type submit. So this field requires value, and this value is going to be represented as a caption on the button, on the submit button. And it also requires a name. Let me run the web server and open this file in the browser. So we are going to use default web server that comes shipped with PHP that we have installed. And to run that web server, the command is php-s localhost : and then we need to provide the port number and hit enter. Now our web server is running on this address. So let's go to that address. This is how it currently looks. We need to bring these fields on separate lines. And to do that, we have to basically put every input field in its own respective div. cut, so Control X. Let's define a div and insert back the input field. I'm going to do the same for the rest of the fields. Okay, I have displayed the editor and the browser side by side, so I don't have to switch between the browser and the editor. Okay, after putting input fields in their respective divs, this is what we get. Next, we need some kind of labeling for each field so the client knows what information to put. And for those, we have two options. We can use labels, but we are going to use placeholders. Okay, the placeholder for name is going to be full name. For the email, it's going to be email. And for the query, it's going to be message. So this is how it looks. Now let's create a CSS file and do rest of the styling through CSS. So let me create style.css and let's link this file. Let's link the style file with our HTML file. Okay. First of all, I'm going to remove all the default padding and margin attached with HTML text by default so that I can apply my own paddings and margins if I want to. Next, work on the body element. Let's define its background. And I'm going to merge two colors for the background. Therefore, I'm going to use a function called linear gradient. With linear gradient, you can merge together multiple colors. It's up to us how many colors we want to merge, starting from 2 to as many as we like. So we are only going to merge just 2 colors. And for each color, I'm using the function RGBA because I'm going to define the intensities for each color. Let's refresh. So this is how it looks. Now as you can see, the colors are being repeated. We don't want this repetition, and if we want to remove this repetition, we have to use another property called background attachment. So we are using this background attachment property because this linear gradient basically treats the color as an image. In fact, if we want, we can attach image as well. So the image is going to be displayed along with the colors as well. But we are not using any image. But nonetheless, these colors are being treated as images. That's why we have to use properties related to images. We want it to be fixed, and you can see the transition from top to bottom. In the body, let's define the font family. Okay, now let's work on the H1 element. For the H1 element, the first thing that we want is we want it to be centrally aligned. Now let's define some margin top, and we want it to be 4% of viewing height, and we want it to be transformed into uppercase. Refresh. Okay, styling. I think we are good with H1 styling. Now we need to work on our form. We want this form to be centrally aligned as well, and it should occupy 60% of the window width. And then we want some space between contact us title and the input fields. So for that, let's start with form itself. So width is going to be, let's say, 60%. And to bring it to the center, we have to set its margin to auto, and margin top is going to be 5 pixels. or shall I make it 15 pixels? Refresh. Okay, that's better. Now we need these input fields to stretch out and occupy as much space as the farm has, that is 60% of the window. Then we want the background to be transparent for the input fields as well. And then we have to change the font size as well, because all of them are input fields and one is text area. First one is going to be the width 100%. So when the width is 100%, that means the 100% of its parent container, and the parent container of each input field and text area is div, and the div occupies 100% of its parent, and the parent of the div is farm, and farm occupies 60% of the window. Therefore the input fields also occupy the 60% of the window. Now we want this background to be transparent, and we also have to set its outline property to none as well. This outline property is going to be highlighted when the cursor is in input field. So when the cursor is in the input field, we will see a black outline around the input field if the outline is not set to none. We also have to remove the border, but we only want the bottom border. And we want this bottom border to be 2 pixels in width, solid in style, and the color should be okay. So this is the border that is going to be displayed. Now we want the color of the text to be white, font size to 18 pixels, and we want some space between each input field, so therefore margin bottom 16 pixels. Now let's refresh. Okay, so this is how it looks after all these transformations. But if you notice, the labels full name, email and message, they are not as visible as we want them. We want them to be white in color, just like the send message text. So setting the color to white has only affected this send message. That is because full name, email and message, they are actually placeholders. So for the placeholders, we have to separately apply styling. And placeholder is actually a pseudo class in CSS. And we only have to set its color to white. But in some browsers it might not work, so if we have to set its opacity to 1, then it will work for all the browsers. Now we have to work on our send message input field, and we want it to look like a button, because the submit button is actually an input field as well. So if we have to define separate properties for only this input field, we have to uniquely refer to that input field, and to uniquely refer to that input field we have to use square brackets, and in square brackets we have to define its type, which is submit. So now the properties that we define over here are only going to affect those input fields whose type is submit, and we only have one such input field. So therefore it's going to affect only just one input field. So the first thing is that we want its background color to be darker shade of blue. Then let's change font weight to bold. Letter spacing between each letter 2 pixels. Font size 20 pixels. Height of the button 50 pixels. And this is how it looks. Now if you want to define a transition such that when we hover our cursor over this button, it should change color, so we have to define a transition. So we want this transition to affect only background color, so we have to tell that, and we want this transition to happen within 1 second, and the way this transition should occur is ease in out. So this is one part of defining a transition. Let me refresh it and show you. So even though I'm moving the cursor over the button, but we can see no change. This is because here we have indicated and defined all the properties related to the transition if it ever occurs. But it will only occur when this background color actually changes. And we want this background color to change when we hover over this button. So that means we have to say again input field of type submit and its hover class. That means when we are hovering on any input field whose type is submit, this is what should happen. The background color should change to a darker shade of gray. Now let's hover over it, and as you can see, now it is being transitioned to a darker shade. Okay, with this we have completed the front end part. Now let's work on the back end. But before we move on to the back-end programming, we need to install a library called PHPMailer, because using this library we can transform this data into an email address. So to install this library, we need to have package manager installed as well. Now what is a package manager? Package manager or dependency manager are those programs which are going to download third-party libraries for us if those libraries are not by default packaged with the installation that we have of any language. And each programming languages have their own package managers or dependency managers. And the most popular dependency manager for PHP is called Composer. So this is the address from where you can download this Composer, getcomposer.org. And once you download this Composer, then you can download and install PHPMailer library from the command prompt. Since I already have Composer installed, let me download PHPMailer library. In this terminal window, we already have our web server running, so I'm going to open another terminal. Now all we need to do is write Composer require PHP mailer / PHP mailer. Once the mailer is installed, we will get a new folder in our project which is called vendor, and inside this vendor we have two more folders, but the most important one is this autoload.php. Beside this vendor folder we have two more files, composer.json and composer.log. So this composer.json basically going to tell us the extra libraries that our program depends on. So currently our dependency is on this PHPMailer library. If we had downloaded more libraries, you would have seen those over here automatically appended as well. Okay, so before we start working on our backend, let's go back to the PHPMailer. This is the GitHub page for PHPMailer. And here you will find all the information about the PHPMailer, its installation, how to use, and all the configurations and everything. Here you will also find a simple program to send an email from PHP. So in order to do that, you have to use these three classes. And then this autoload.php. Then you create an object of type PHPMailer, and then here these are our different configuration settings. Many of them are optional, and once you have set those configurations, you can send the message. If for some reason you are not able to send the email, you will get an exception. So basically our program is going to be more or less consisting of these. So let's start working. Now let's go back up. So within this tag we are going to define all the PHP logic. First of all, we need those three classes. So use the first one is PHPMailer class from this library. The second one is from the same library. We need a class of type SMTP because we are going to use SMTP server as our email server. And the third one is exceptions class from the same library. Then we also depend on autoload.php file. So autoload.php is inside our project. There is a folder, so that means the path is going to be in the current folder, that is our project. We have a folder named vendor, and within this folder we have a class called autoload.php. Our program requires this. Okay, after doing that, now all we need to do is we have to create an object of type PHPMailer. But before that, what we are going to do is that we are going to extract data from the HTTP request which is sent from the front end, and that data has been sent as HTTP post method. And since data has been sent as a HTTP post request, so we have to extract that data from host global variable and store it in local variables. So the first one is going to be the name, and we can get it from post with the same name. Then we have, let's call it client email, and that has been sent with a variable named email. Then the query is in a variable named message. Now we have extracted the data from the HTTP post request, but before we code any further, we have to handle one issue, which is, since our front end and back end, that is PHP and HTML, are all in the one file, so the moment this file is loaded in the browser, both PHP and HTML will try to be executed. But we want this PHP to only start executing when we hit this send message. Before that, we don't want this PHP code to execute, because before hitting this send message there won't be any data. So these variables name, client email and query, they are going to be empty and they will raise exceptions. Therefore we have to somehow tell this PHP to only execute when the send message is hit and a HTTP request is received. And to do that, we are going to put all this code inside an if statement, which is going to check if this field, this send message field, is set or not. And the name of this field is submit. So we are saying if this submit variable is set, that means it has some value, it's not empty. Only in that case do the following code. So all our PHP code is going to be inside these curly brackets. Now after getting the data and storing it in local variables, what we need to do is that we need to create an object of type PHPMailer. And instantiating with true is going to allow this exception class to raise exceptions with more detailed information, so that we get better idea the kind of exception or error that has occurred. Now what we need to do is that we have to set these different configuration properties of this PHPMailer object. Since we have lots of properties to set, so I'm going to copy paste this. Okay. Now the first property is that we have to inform this PHPMailer object that we are going to use SMTP server, and we do that by executing this SMTP method, isSMTP method. Now we have to give the host address of SMTP server that we are going to use. Since we are going to use Gmail, smtp.gmail.com is the host that we are going to use. Now username. Now this username is going to be the username of that Gmail account to which PHPMailer is going to connect, and using that account an email is going to be created and sent somewhere. So this is the account that I'm going to use. So basically this program is going to log in to this account, and from there it will send the email. So I have provided the username. Now I have to provide the password. And since this PHP program is going to log into my account, therefore I have to let the SMTP server, that is Google's email server, to authenticate this program using this username and password. And to set this authentication setting, I have to set its SMTP auth property to true. And we also have to provide the port, which is 587, and we also have to inform the kind of security which is going to be used for sending this email. So the property is SMTP secure, and we have to provide what kind of security we want to use, transport layer security or session layer security. We are using transport layer security. Now we have to define the sender of this email, who has sent this email. So the sender is going to be the client who has made this query. So that means his email address is going to be stored in client email variable. But the configuration variable that we have to set is set from, and it's actually a method. So we are passing client email variable to it. So we have defined the sender of the email address. Now we have to define the recipient, like who shall this email be sent to. So the person who is responsible for handling these queries, we have to define that person's email address, so which is going to be defined through attribute add address. Sorry, it's a method, and I want to use the same email address. Of course, you can use different email address over here if you like. Next, we have to define if we want to send this message as a HTML message or simply a text message. Since nowadays almost all email clients are HTML based, because we can send attachments as well. So we are going to set is HTML to true, that we are sending a HTML message. Then we have to define the subject that we want to give this email. So let's call it contact us message. Next we have to define the body. Now because we have defined the body is going to be HTML, so let me go up and define a variable named body, and we want this message to start with hello, then next line, then the message itself, which is query, then next line, and on that next line we want from, and then the sender. Okay, so this is the message we want to send. So we will simply put this variable name over here. Now in case the email client of the sender is is very old and it doesn't display HTML properly, it only displays text message. So in that case we have to use another configuration, which is alternate body, and we want to send this same message but without those HTML tags. So to strip off those HTML tags from this message, we have to use function called strip tags and pass in this variable body. Now we have to, since we have set all the properties, we are going to send the email. So if no exception is raised, we want to display a message above the send message button that the message sent successfully. Otherwise we want to display the error message. So that means we have to create another variable, call it response. Let's keep it empty. And since we want it to be displayed above the send message button, so we have to go down to that submit button. So let me put this within a div as well. Now before this input field, let's create a spawn tag, and in this spawn tag, since we want to display PHP message response, since currently this response is empty, so we won't see anything displayed over here. What happened on line 2? We actually don't need forward slashes, rather we need backward slashes. Okay, let's refresh it. Okay, as you can see, we can't see any message displayed over here because currently this variable response represent empty text. So even though there is an empty text over here, but because it's empty, we can't see anything over here. But now after sending the email, if we don't get any error message, in that case we want to change the contents of this response variable to email sent successfully. If that is not the case, we are going to get an exception raised, and since an exception could be raised, so in that case all the configurations, they should be put inside try and catch block. So I'm going to cut it, put try block and insert back. Now here let's put catch block, and within the body of this catch block we want to assign different value to this response variable. And the error will be in error info field of mail object. Okay, so that was that was all the coding that we needed to do. But before we actually send the email address, we have to set certain properties in our email account as well. So let's go back to the account. So the first thing that we need to have enabled is that we have to go to the settings, see all settings, then forwarding and pop/imap, and then we have to make sure this imap is enabled. By default it's disabled. Mine is already enabled. You guys might have to enable it. Okay, then we have to go to the account, then manage the account, then click on the security, and then we have to enable this less secure app access as well. Mine is already turned on, but I'm sure you guys have to turn it on as well. If these two settings are set properly, then we should be able to send the email message using this account anywhere we like. So now let's give it a try. Refresh. xyz@gmail.com. Let's hit the send message. We got an error on line 16. It says undefined method is SMTP. Okay, the mistake is in spelling. SMTP, not STM. Okay, let's refresh. ABC at gmail.com. Message from ABC. So I did not get any message displayed over here. I need to put echo over here. It says undefined variable response. Okay, so I need to take this outside the if block. Otherwise, this response variable is going to be only created once this if statement is executed. But since we are displaying this response variable all the time in our HTML code, so it should be defined all the time. Okay, let's refresh. Now CCC at message from CCC. Email sent successfully. Now let's go and check our inbox. Now I got the message, hello, message from CCC. So we have successfully received an email using PHPMailer through our PHP program. Now we need to do just two more things. First of all, we need to see how can we send some file or image, number one as an attachment or as an embedded image. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to download one image over here, and then I'm going to show you how to send that image as an attachment as well as an embedded image. Okay, so I have this image named hardwarecomponents.php, and if I want to send that image as an attachment in my email, in that case I only have to add one more configuration. Which is add attachment, and as a parameter we have to pass the path where this image is located, since we have in the same directory. Okay, so this will send it as an attachment. Now if we want the image to be sent as an embedded image, in that case we have to use the property add embedded image. And it requires two parameters. The first one is going to be the path, and second one is going to be its content ID, or CID for short. So let me give it image ID 1. So I'm saying that this is the unique content ID for this embedded image, which I can choose whatever I like, but I have to make sure that the message that I'm sending, I have that image ID attached as well as an image element. And here we have to provide the same CID. Let's refresh. Now this time QQQ. Let's hit the send button. Okay, now let's go and check the account. So I've got the message with attachment and embedded image from QQQ. Now this is the embedded image and this is its attachment. So for the attachment we have to download them, and the embedded image is Embaded as our background image. So this is the end of our tutorial. I hope you liked it, and if you did, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you so much.